resumes to companies that weren't even asking for resumes, just trying to figure out how I could get a job. And this was 2006. It wasn't, there wasn't a recession going on. There wasn't COVID going on. It was your typical time period. Now, this was before the natural gas boom and the Marcellus shale play started ramping up. So it was a little different time than it is now, but it's a tough market. So you need to work really hard at looking for a job, and sometimes it takes a little luck. So my first position was with the Hutchinson Group out of Monroeville. He's a geophysical company. And I got this because Dr. Burkhart was at the Pittsburgh Geologic Society meeting. He met Pete Hutchinson, or he may have already known Pete, and Pete said, I'm looking for somebody that's going to work hard. I have a really high burnout rate, and I need somebody who's willing to travel and do the dirty work. And Dr. Burkhart was like, I got your guy. So to get this position, I did turn down a summer job with the State Park Service that was offered to me, but that position was me hiking the trails with a GPS unit strapped to my back for them to have a better mapping system. Now that does sound like a lot of fun to spend a summer hiking. I could take my parents' dog and just kind of have fun with it. But even though my mentality was party first, work later, I also like to plan. And whenever I was looking at the Park Service job, that job ended in August. There was no guarantee of a job past that, and I could be back to square one. So I decided that I wanted to go work for the more sure thing, for a company where it was a full-time job. It had benefits, it had a 401k, it was a real big boy job. And that's what I was going for at that point, instead of taking the risk. So I worked for the Hutchinson Group from May of 2006 to July of 2007. You know, I walked down the graduation aisle on Saturday. I moved Sunday through Monday, and Tuesday my job started. So a lot of people that typically does not happen, that you're able to jump straight from class to the field in under a week. So I was very fortunate in that regard. So you can see I didn't work there that long, but I worked all over the country, from Florida to Wyoming to North Dakota, Jersey, and everywhere in between. It was a mixture of flying and driving. So there was driving out to St. Louis, there was driving to Florida, flying to places like North Dakota, Wyoming, and Texas. There was a lot of on-the-job training, and I think the theme with all my jobs is it is a lot of on-the-job training. Your education is providing you the tools and the resources and the background to start applying things to the real world. So, you know, we're environmental scientists, we're not engineers. So the way it looks in the textbook is not the way it looks in the field. So it's just getting you prepared and giving you the tools. So I was learning to do things like the GPR, which is ground penetrating radar, electromagnetic testing, the EM31 and 61. So I'll go through examples of each of these. So the GPR we would be using to look for storage tanks at former gas stations. I also was working south of Columbus looking for dead bodies. There was an 1800s, 1700s family cemetery, and the people who owned the property were putting in a new house and they were putting in a new driveway. Well, they ticked off their neighbors. So the neighbors called the historical society and said, they're about to run a driveway through a bunch of dead bodies. So we had to use the GPR unit, and I'm going to get a little creepy here. So, you know, you see anomalies with a GPR, you have to test to see what you're looking at. So if you think it might be a dead body, you take about a 6-foot long pole that's about a 1/4 inch in diameter, and you start sliding it down, and there's resistance, 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 and then you're like, yep, I just went through a body cavity. But it's 1700, so not that big of a deal. It's mostly dirt at that point anyways. But they originally thought, yeah, there might be 6 or 7 potential family members here. I think we found up to 30. And it might not have just been people. It could have been the family dog. It could have been the family horse. Not really sure what things were, but that was along the odder side of that. So the EM31 and 61. So the top picture is the EM61. It's a pull behind cart that has GPS right on it. So you're collecting 20 to 50 readings a second, and it's looking for the resistivity of the ground. And this goes down upwards of 15 feet below the ground surface. So we'd be looking for storage tanks, we'd be looking for piping, anything like that. And then we would go back with the GPR and try and pinpoint locations. So, you know, if they were doing construction, hitting a pipeline is bad. You know, if they're trying to remove a storage tank, they want to do it as quickly as possible. So we would do that. The electrical resistivity testing, one facility that comes to mind was down in Somerset, Pennsylvania. They believed there were some shallow coal mines underneath the soccer field. They were worried about subsidence and also constructing, you know, other structures in that area. So we were running this resistivity testing to be able to map the mine voids from that. Another example is anybody from the Pittsburgh area, Settlers Ridge Shopping Center. We did the mapping there because that was a former high wall mine. So we were identifying where all the backfill was and mine spoils versus solid bedrock. We found that rock wall so that they knew what kind of structures they had to use whenever they were digging to build, which is what now is a really large shopping center. Seismic profiling, we did that a lot in Texas and Wyoming, and we got known as the guys who give away sledgehammers because we would go down there and a company would drill a hole for us, and then we would put a device down the hole that would measure P&S waves that we created using a sledgehammer and a metal plate. And they were measuring the speed of those waves to figure out the density and competency of the rock for windmill bases. So they needed to know which kind of base, you know, how big of a base, how deep they needed to go so these windmills wouldn't topple over. You know, the fun story with there was we convinced them to let us climb up inside one of those windmills. They're really flipping high, and we did it at sunset. So I'm locked in at the top of this windmill. I'm like, I'm gonna stand up now. And I got to about knee level and the winds blew because surprisingly they put windmills where it's really windy. And I was like, I'm good enough. And back down the windmill I went. And then I also did groundwater sampling. And that was probably what led me to my next job. Was we did a lot of work for landfills and groundwater sampling for the landfills because, you know, trash in the landfill, good, leachate out of the landfill, bad. So you always had to monitor that on a quarterly basis to make sure they were doing what they were supposed to be doing. So there was a lot of training with groundwater sampling on that. So what did I learn from this job? I learned to wake up early, at least 6:30 in the morning to drive to work every day, which is crazy now because now I'm up at 5. I worked at the Hutchinson Group. It was a mom and pop type shop, 7 people max at one time. I got to travel all over the country. Awesome. I couldn't plan a single weekend 2 weeks in advance because I didn't know if too much rain would occur in Texas and the fields would be flooded and we wouldn't be able to get in and our work would be delayed, or if we didn't get our job done, something like that. So it was very difficult to actually have a life at that point. I was expected to work 45 hours a week, not a big deal, no overtime pay. So I might be working 60 hours a week. I'm still getting paid as if I was sitting in the office. But it was a foot in the door. I learned how to groundwater sample, start being an environmental professional, and that's what got me my next job. So then I moved on to MacTech. No longer there, but I found that job just on Monster. I applied, interview, they called my references the next day and offered me the job the next day. It was a very fast process. Typically, it does not happen that fast, but they needed somebody. So much so that I was going to start one week, go to the vacation at the beach the following week, and they said, yes, we want you here for that first week. They needed somebody that bad. So again, I worked there August 2007 to January 2011. I continued to travel the country, not necessarily as exotic, but Indiana, Louisiana, New York, Vermont, Washington, D.C. So groundwater sampling again, I had learned that in my first job, multiple ways to groundwater sample, whether you're just lifting a baler, getting the water out, if you're using a pump to pump it out at 5 gallons a minute, or bladder pumps to go very low flow. Did a lot of oil recovery. I worked for a lot of oil refineries up in Bradford, Pennsylvania, which I don't know if you can see my mouse. This whole stretch is an oil refinery along a creek. So much so that much of this creek had concrete filling its banks so that the oil didn't go into the creek. It's one of the oldest refineries in the world. It started in the 1800s. So there is a lot of oil at this place. So there was a lot of recovery there. I also did contaminant delineation. So I spent 3 months in Indiana, the state, working around a chemical plant because they found TCE and PCE plume in the groundwater. So we went around installing groundwater monitoring wells this was in a former glacial environment. So it was a lot of fill down to 100 feet and then bedrock. So we were putting nested groundwater wells in the overburden, which to me, geologist, overburden, anything that's not rock, even if it's a couple 100 feet deep. So we'd be putting multiple wells in there because there were multiple perched aquifers in there. So you're trying to pinpoint where this plume is. So you spent 3 months doing that, a couple $1 million, and you're living there that whole time. That was a 10-day on, 4-day off type of job. But I argued with my boss that I don't know how anybody considers a 7-hour drive a day off, because you always had to drive back out to the site on Sundays. But I also did work, like the top picture is Andrews Air Force Base down by Washington, D.C. We had a contract to work out there. So there were groundwater sampling all over the place. And right about here, there were a bunch of groundwater monitoring wells where you had to drive out there and a guy stood there with an AK-47 about 10 feet from you staring at you because you were watching F-16s take off and land every 5 minutes. We saw one of those stealth bombers just fly overhead, and Air Force One was also housed there. So you had multiple people with guns on you whenever you were near Air Force One. But yeah, so, and then also groundwater and soil remediation. You know, you find the bad stuff, you clean it up, whether it's you're injecting something or you're just digging it out. Over on this side of the runways, we were injecting something that was pretty much like molasses into the ground on 10-foot centers to promote bug growth so that the bugs could eat the contamination. And then down here, I was mapping the old landing strip where they would use the firefighting foams and everything, and we could map the sides of the runway by the contamination, where you would just go back and forth looking and just finding the sides of that runway. So, and then probably my most interesting job was I spent 6 months working on the BP oil spill with this company. So we were a contractor to a contractor down there, and from April to October, I was shuttling back and forth, and I eventually was put on a state boat where I was the BP representative while the state was collecting water and sediment samples along the shorelines from the Texas border to New Orleans to get a baseline to figure out what things had to return to for everything to be good. So let somebody in. I don't know who. So that was fun, and I did such a good job at it that the state offered me a job down there. It was 1,500 miles from home. I was going to be getting married the following year. You know, I talked to my wife. She was like, "They have a school for the deaf down there. She's a teacher of the deaf. Sure, let's try it." But that case of me worrying about my future popped up again, and there were supposed to be budget cuts that year, and 1,500 state employees needed to be let go. Well, last person in is usually the first person out. I wasn't moving 1,500 miles away just to pack my bags in 3 months and go home. So with MacTech, my closest job site was an hour away. My next closest job site was 3.5 hours away. So it was a lot of overnight travel. This was a 1,500 person company based out of Georgia, but my office only had about 20 people in it. So it was a very small office in this big cog of a conglomeration. So it was just kind of everything was passed down to you. Thou shalt do this now. And there was never reasoning behind it. It was just, this is what you have to do. My last year with this company, I stayed in a Comfort Inn 165 nights in 1 year. That is one hotel chain. That does not include Best Westerns or the Motel 6 that you can find in Podunk, Texas or wherever. So I truly lived in a hotel room for half the year, and my fiance did not appreciate that very much. So between the travel, and I also had no room to grow in this company, and I recognized that. It's a 20-person office. I didn't see a lot of people coming from an entry-level position and working their way up into a management position. And that's what I told them whenever I left, was I don't see a future here going into management. And the office manager looked at me and said, "You're absolutely right. There is no room here to grow. So good luck." And I left on great terms with them, and I still talk to some of them. And then, this will work. I moved to an environmental consulting company, civil and environmental consultants based out of Pittsburgh. So while I was working on the New York Vermont border, I got a phone call on my cell phone saying, hey, your resume looks really good on Monster. You want a job? So that's how they started courting me. I worked from January 2011 until December of 2018 there. So it was it was a month under 8 years that I worked with them. And I did move from a project scientist, which was upper level field person, to a project manager role in that time. So it was a growing company, and I did have room to grow. And as long as I did well and presented myself well, I could keep moving forward. So there was a lot less travel here. You know, I still hit some Arkansas, some North Carolinas, some Mississippis, but I was not gone 165 nights out of the year. And really, in 2011, that's kind of an important time too, because this is when the Marcellus shale boom really was ramping up. So I started with this company, it was 400 people. By the time I left, it was 900 people. We had over doubled in size in those 8 years, and a lot of it was to do with natural gas because we started servicing that market. But we always worked with other clientele because natural gas is a boom and bust cycle, and a lot of people get fired whenever things go bust and oil prices go negative. So I did more groundwater sampling, a lot of groundwater contaminant delineation, groundwater soil remediation, and this is where I started getting into compliance work. So remediation work usually is, you know, I always joked that I did the oh shit jobs. Something happens, a person at a company goes, oh shit, and then they called us and said, we just spilled 10,000 gallons of oil. We just had a chemical spill. We just had a PCB oil spill. My day is ruined. Come fix this. So they were usually highly stressed. It was really good money, but then that job ends. Your goal is to clean something up. And whenever you've cleaned something up, you're done with your job. So I started expanding my knowledge base into the compliance side, where compliance is, okay, every year I have to send out these reports. Every quarter I have to check this SPCC plan, make sure it's up to date. The things that are recurring, they're a smaller price tag job, but that job's never going away. And a lot of times with these companies, a steel manufacturer, a chemical plant, they're going to have an environmental health and safety manager. I always laugh whenever I see environmental on that because I know SRU has a really great safety program. They don't talk about the environment at all, but magically, every company decides, hey, I don't know anything about the environment. I don't know anything about safety. Let's put them into one job and let them figure it out. And that's typically how I got work, because I would talk to my friends who had a safety degree from Slippery Rock. They're the environmental health and safety person. And he's like, I don't know how to do my tier 2 reporting or my TRI reporting. And I'd be like, no problem. Here's my invoice. They're happy. I'll see you again next year and we'll do this all over again. So I wanted that more consistent work. So that's why I started learning that. And I started asking other managers, hey, do you need help with this? I'm a little slow right now, or I already have 40 hours in, but I'm willing to work some overtime to learn a new skill. I'll do this too. And then I could start marketing myself in that compliance role. And then I also did phase 1 environmental site assessments, which you need experience before you do a phase 1 environmental site assessment, because you just walk around, you do a database search, you're looking at old Sanborn maps or fire insurance maps. You kind of walk the site and you just look, what could be wrong with this site? What are you hiding from me? And if you're a year out of school, you have no idea what's going on. But if you build that resume, you've seen some things, you've been to 30 states, you see the things that people screw up, that's whenever you start to figure that out. Unfortunately, a phase one is a pretty cheap process. Nobody takes it too seriously until you screw one up, and then they hit, gas tank. People get really upset with you whenever you don't catch a gas tank. One of my sites, they were putting in a nursing home, and as I was leaving, I look over, I'm like, I wonder what that steel pipe is sticking out of the ground. It was a capped natural gas well. There were no records of it anywhere. I called the DEP. They had zero records of it. They're like, this doesn't exist. You don't know what you're talking about. I sent them a picture and they were like, oh shit, that's a well. Yep, you have a well, congratulations. Well, that client will spend about $120,000 closing that well because they want to put a nursing home right where that well is. So it's things that you need to pay attention to.
Let me just quickly say, Christopher, sorry for the interruption, but you gave me a great segue. One of our speakers we're going to line up for the spring is another alum. And one of the things that he's after right now is closing up abandoned wells. So we have a lot of orphan wells in Pennsylvania, and they continue to emit methane and oils, and they're a terrible carbon source, but they're also absolutely a physical hazard. Buildings blow up, babies can fall down them, they're a hazard to wildlife. So well abandonment is something that we're spending money on in Pennsylvania, and it's taking care of a really critical hazard that is in our backyard that we need to get rid of. Thank you, Chris.
Yep, absolutely.
Can I also ask another question about that? I've been reading, a lot of related climate change stuff, and I'm reading that a lot of the Marcellus Shale companies don't have the funds in escrow to actually pay to close these wells, and that a lot of that is going to fall on the citizens of Pennsylvania in terms of tax dollars to actually have the funds to close up these wells. Do you know anything about that? A lot of articles that I've seen anyway.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I was just seeing if there were other questions. No, I'm not going to worry about the chat. Okay. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that one because I've never been on the producer side who's putting in the wells, but I mean, there are the permits that they have to apply for. There are fees, but I don't think the fees cover the well closings probably enough. And there are the Marcellus wells.
I think it was particularly companies that were going bankrupt that
Yeah.
supposed to have an escrow account that is filled with this money that's used to close up the wells, but the escrow accounts are empty.
Yeah, and that sounds like a lot of 2011 stuff. It was the Wild West. Everybody was trying to get as much land as humanly possible, move. A lot of these companies were built to be bought. Their goal was for somebody to buy them because that's where the real money was. Oh, I got all this property. All right, now let a CNX buy me or a Range Resources buy me. And that's a lot of these small, mom and pop 7-person type companies, did get bought up or they went bankrupt. A lot of these gas wells, though, are pre-Marcellus. They're shallow gas wells. The one was on a power company property. We knew about it. It had a wooden casing. It was so old. So it was early 1900s type stuff. And those are the ones that have the wood, or they're not sealed, they're right next to a creek, and the stuff is running into the creeks. Right now, the number that jumps to my head is around 13,000 abandoned orphan gas wells. I think that's probably low though, because nobody actually knows either. And you
Someone
take,
put in the chat 8,300. Michael did.
okay, yeah. So the Marcellus wells, yes, they can be an issue, but right now it's worrying about the even older ones. That have no seals on them whatsoever, and people don't even know about them. You know, baby Jessica can end up in that well. Only the professors will understand that joke, kind of a joke, sorry. So yeah, so I worked for chemical companies, I worked for natural gas companies, steel manufacturers, real estate, coal fire electric. Down here on the bottom is ArcelorMittal in Weirton, steel manufacturer. I did work for them. They were one of the companies that called me with oh shit, because they had PCB oil in former transformers. PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, haven't been manufactured since the 1970s. But these old transformers are just sitting there, not even being used. Fire happens, fire causes the liquids to expand, the oil goes spraying. Now this company had one of those emergency protocols in place. If something happens here, firefighters use firefighting foam. Water is bad with oil, foam is good. Firefighters come running in, use water. So oil and water don't get along. It spreads all over the floor. And then there are these giant holes in the concrete that they use to stabilize equipment. That hole goes the whole way to their basement. So this PCB oil is raining down on their basement. And then it goes into this collection trench because they have groundwater against their walls. The only thing that stopped PCB oil from being pumped into the Ohio River was them using the water, shorted out the electricity, so the pump stopped. Or else it would have went into the river and it would have been even worse. Luckily, that didn't happen. Another company I worked for, this is called Little Blue Run. It is a coal combustion residuals pond that is about 1,000 acres in size and had the largest earthen dam this side of the Mississippi. So, you know, as you're burning the coal to make electricity, you're using water to spray the exhaust to pull this CCR out, and then it gets pumped into this big pond and it's left there and it's unlined. So not great, but it was allowed. It is now closed. Whenever I left CEC, they were in the process of closing it. And if you look at the Google Earth pictures now, it's smaller, it's getting capped. There's a clay liner trying to keep water out of it. So yeah, so that was CEC. You know, I worked in the corporate office, which was nice. So I actually knew the COO of the company, the COO of the company, the CFO, and I was able to talk to these people. I was able to interact with them. The chief operating officer used to work for AK Steel, and he and I would BS all the time, and he would bring me in on projects because he liked me. That's what you have to do. You have to find people that you get along with. So I really liked that. The downside was, once I became a manager, now I was a doer seller. CEC does not have a sales force. They don't have the guy that goes around making nice with everybody, trying to sell their services. Each manager is in charge of a budget where you have your project management goal that you have to reach, and you have your marketing goal that you have to reach. So I have to bring in, what was it? As a project manager one, I had to manage $200,000 worth of work each year I had to bring in $300,000 worth of work each year to meet my goal. I meet my goal, I get a nice bonus. I don't meet my goal, I get less of a bonus. So I like the science, but I didn't like the selling. Apparently I'm good at selling, but I felt a little greasy about it. Apparently I can talk to people, but that's not what I wanted to do. That's not why I got into the science field. I know friends who are marketing and selling. I don't want to be one of those guys. So that's kind of why I started looking elsewhere. But also during this time, I wanted to have those nice 2 initials after my name, PG. So I started applying for the licensure process. With an environmental geoscience degree, I could not sit for the PG, even though I had been doing geologic work and hydrogeology for 10 years at that point. They said, too bad, you don't have the geology degree. All right, fine. I'm going to get a master's. So I applied to the University of Pittsburgh, and with my stellar 2.5 GPA in undergraduate, it wasn't a slam dunk me getting in there. So I found an advisor that was doing hydro work. I approached him, you know, talked to him. He's like, you're going to be working full time, right? Yep. You want a research fellowship? Nope. Housing? Nope. So loans? Nope, my company's going to pay for it. He's like, so you just need a seat in a chair and somebody to advise you for your thesis. Yep. Okay, sure. So that's how I got into grad school. Did that from July 2012 until May 2016. I was on academic probation to start out. So I was working full time, 40 to 60 hours. I was still traveling. I went from a 2.5 GPA to 2 points on one test in environmental controls and mining from getting straight A's in my master's. So it was not easy. I highly, highly do not recommend it. So there was one point where I was working in Eastern Pennsylvania for 3 solid months, and I would rush back to the hotel room, plug my laptop into the TV in the room, and sit there and watch my environmental controls and mining class, because luckily the engineering department at Pitt loves money. They love working professionals whose companies will cut them a check at one point and give it to them. So they'll put cameras in to their classrooms, and they'll actually put their classes at night so a working professional can sit through them.
So Chris, like, let me ask you a question. What do you mean you wouldn't recommend working full-time and getting a master's degree, or you wouldn't recommend getting a master's degree?
Sorry, I would not recommend working full-time while getting a master's degree.
Okay.
So I would be working 40 to 60 hours. I would take a single class. And so my second class was geophysics with Bill Hortert. Really cool guy. Definitely a stoner from the 70s, but really smart. His first homework assignment took me over 20 hours to complete. And I went in and I got help from him and I completed it. And he admitted to me, yeah, I know this homework sucks. I do that intentionally because this computer lab has 25 seats in it and Pitt makes me accept 30 students. So I need some people to drop out so that each student has a computer. Okay, so working 40 to 60 hours, have my night class, getting home at 10 o'clock at night, and then spending 20 hours on the weekends doing homework. I didn't have a life for 4 years. My wife did the same thing for the 4 years beforehand. So she didn't have a life, then I didn't have a life, and then we got to have a life. So it's very difficult to do. So
Christopher, let me mention quickly that some of our students are going to start departing to go to a 1 o'clock class.
Okay.
But in case
Oh,
it's not obvious to anyone and everyone, we're awfully dang proud of you. All right. You're an example of one of the kinds of students that we specialize in at Slippery Rock University, people that come in heavily distracted, without strong direction, without deep work ethic. But baby, you rose to the task and you have really blossomed as a professional. So before people start to depart, maybe we should offer Christopher a round of applause. And then don't be offended if the gallery starts
I
to
start
switch
seeing the
off.
number drop.
Yes,
And
sir. Way to be. And thank
Thank
you
you.
for coming with us today.
Absolutely.
And maybe if any students that need to take off, if they have questions, would you field them right now, Chris?
Yeah. Yeah. If anybody wants to ask anything.
Don't be shy. Ask a question.
Now's your chance. I'm honest.
Yeah. I have a question for you, Chris.
Sure.
So out of all of the classes that you took in your program, you know, you had to take, so you got a BA, right, in environmental geoscience.
Yep.
So out of those courses, which do you feel prepared you the most for, you know, going on in your career? You know, because there's a whole bunch of them that you took. It could be physics, it could have been chemistry, it could have been math, whatever it might have been. What do you think? Which courses do you think were essential? Were an essential piece to your program and to you as a working professional?
Yeah. So with the career path I have taken, hydrogeology was what I was using the most because there's a lot of soil and there's water and there's interaction between the two. And if you're doing a soil remediation, you have to deal with the water and vice versa. So there was a lot of groundwater sampling, you know, soil sampling. So the hydro and those hydro calculations are what I used predominantly. You know, and I had a lot of my wife's cousin is a geologist, and whenever he was getting ready to go into the field, he asked too, and I said hydro. He's like, oh, I hate hydro. I'm like, welcome to consulting. So that was probably the biggest. And we really didn't have the type of course, but if somebody focused on laws and regulations, because regulations are key. So I'm going to jump here. So
we do have an environmental law and that is taught in our department now too.
Okay. And that very well could help then.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if that's, you know, I think that would be a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what got me, I mean, knowing how to read and interpret regulations is what got me my current job. So I'll just jump there. Now I work for Williams. Williams is a natural gas pipeline company. We touch 30% of the natural gas in this country. So company drills wells, and then they send it to our compressor stations where we dry the gas. We take the water out of the gas. We send it to our processing plants where we separate the methane, the ethane, the propanes, butanes, pentanes, and then we put it in our transmission lines that run from Pennsylvania to Mont Belvieu, Texas, and from Colorado the whole way up into Seattle. I've been there since the beginning of last year, and my boss was a former consultant, and his boss is the VP of environmental, was also an environmental consultant, and they love environmental consultants because the VP told me one day, we hire consultants and waiters because you know how to juggle multiple projects. You're used to the pressure and always jumping from one thing to the next. It's good to have a little bit of ADHD. I might have a little more than a little, but so I know how to read and interpret regulations, and that's what I do. Once a year, we have to report our greenhouse gas emissions, so carbon dioxide, methane, NO2, to the EPA, and I have to run big, confusing calculations to compile our 23 processing plants, our 250 gathering compressor stations, and our 50 transmission stations. Massive workbooks. You just spend time playing with math, reading the regulations, interpreting them, being like, oh, I think we screwed that up. We have to change this entire process for the next year. And that's why I got hired as a geologist / hydrogeologist, and I work in air now. So I also work on methane reduction programs. We're trying to reduce our methane emissions by 50% from our 2005 numbers by 2030. So I'm working on that. Pigging, which is cleaning our lines. They're doing it for safety. I'm doing it to make sure we're collecting all the environmental data that we're supposed to be doing, so we don't turn into Mark West and have the DOJ come down with assault rifles on them and arresting people because they're not doing their reporting like they're supposed to be doing. True story, it actually happened. So that's what I do now. So the moral of the story is look for early opportunities. Whenever I was at CEC, we were looking for summer interns. I know I would pass them along to Dr. Burkhart for him to, I don't know what you guys do now. It used to be stick it on the wall in Vincent, but you're not there anymore. We had very few people applying for summer internships. We got one guy, I loved him. He went off to grad school. You know, we were looking for interns the next year. My response was, can we hire him again? Like, I like him, I can trust him. He does good work. Nobody else is applying. So you get in good, you do a good job, after your sophomore year, after your junior year, they're going to hire you over anybody else. So start early, make connections. A lot of my jobs are because I know people or I have connections with people. I know a lot of different people in different companies now. If something happens, I feel like I'm pretty safe that one of my friends who knows my work ethic, who I've worked with maybe 10 years ago, was like, that guy kicked ass. Yeah, I'll take a chance on him and hire him. And if you want to do something, ask. People aren't going to just give you opportunities. I wanted to know compliance. I forced my way in. I asked, I learned it on my own with some help. Everything's not going to come to you on a silver platter. If you want to do something, you need to be the one to ask, because if you don't ask, the people are going to assume you're happy doing what you're doing the exact same thing all the time.
Awesome.
And there's my email if you have other questions for more.
Does anyone have time maybe for one or two questions? Does anyone have? Yeah, Lucas, I see you. Hand up.
So it seems, I mean, one of the exciting things, at least for me when I switched to geology, was it seems like with a basic kind of environmental, geology understanding, you can go a lot of different routes even after you've already graduated or already gotten a job. Is this kind of your experience? And then how does kind of the continued learning nature of having a science job play into your ability to be able to kind of jump around between different career paths?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I kind of liked hydro, but you're right. It's and it depends on the size of your company too, right? If it's a 7-person company and they're very niche, you're only going to have so many opportunities to expand what you're doing whenever you're with that small company. And that's whenever I was at MacTech, there was very certain things that I was able to do there and I wasn't able to expand. Then I got over to CEC, who was bigger, and there were more people doing different things. So that's whenever I had the opportunity. But yeah, I mean, there's two ways of looking for a job. I want a job, or this is what I want to do. Now, if this is what you want to do, it's going to be a lot harder to find a job. Might be a lot happier in the end, than just finding a job. But yeah, and bouncing around, I mean, I'm still going to conferences. I'm always looking at new technology, learning about new things to stay on the forefront. I'm going to be talking to a optical gas imaging company who now says they can quantify my methane emissions. And my response is, okay, prove it. I got to see the data before I'm just going to hop on something. But if we like what they're doing, it's going to save me some time, save my company money. They'll love me, and you're ahead of the curve. So you always still have to be learning. You can't stay stagnant. The regulations are always changing. I don't know if any of you guys heard, Quad OA just had a massive change in it. Transmission stations are no longer regulated for methane, and Quad OA is no longer regulated for methane. So we got to be learning those new regulations constantly too, going to new seminars about it. But yeah.
It's remarkable to me you've been able to, to do all these different fields, geology, soil, hydro, air, and you left with a degree in environmental science. And I don't know, it's really, I think empowering maybe for students to see, you don't have to have that specific degree. You have to have that really good understanding of science, and you can, Luke, do anything. You can bounce around and hit different fields, and you might find that, like Chris, you might find you're not really sales and you like hydro more, and at least it's cool to see that you were able to make those moves and really go after what you love doing. So,
and it does take time. It's
Yeah.
not like, oh, I want to do this, I'm going to switch. It took me a year of looking to find something that matched. A drilling company has an environmental position. I don't like drilling companies because they go like this. So this is really good, this is really bad, I get fired. So, also looking for steady work too. So
Yeah.
it depends on what, your risk tolerance as well.
Chris,
Yeah.
let me make a point and then ask you to comment on something. From about 2010, 2011, I agree with you. The Marcellus was absolutely spreading like wildfire, and it ran really heavily till about 2018. And during that point in time, and I think this is important for the students to hear, anyone getting any kind of degree out of our department had employment opportunities, and the vast majority of every one of them was working on the shale gas play. And that included our geographers, absolutely, because you heard Chris talk about companies acquiring leases on land, and all of that information was managed through GIS. So that's my question to you, Christopher. In the duration of your career, how much emphasis was there in the firms on geographic information and GISs and spatial management?
So GIS, yeah, whenever I went over to Williams, Zach Schmitty was over there. He was in the department. The GIS groups, typically it's more, you have to focus on GIS to go into GIS, rather than maybe say me, who had a single GIS class going over into there. They have compartmentalized groups that is their job, is mapping systems and working with them. And I email them and say, can you send me a map, or show me this property line or these boundaries. But yeah, GIS is big in the last 3 companies I've worked at. So if GIS is something you want, you definitely need to focus on that more. I did. All right.
Yeah, Jeremy. Go ahead.
Yeah, Chris, was there anything in your undergrad that you didn't expect to use
I don't think I knew exactly what the hell I would be doing when I graduated. So I'm not sure. I don't know. That's a really good question, but I don't sell your books.
That
No
much.
matter how bad you want beer money, because I had to rebuy so many books, it was annoying. But if you have to rebuy, buy the international version because they're cheaper. Um, but yeah, so I think that would actually be it, is keep your books, keep your reference materials, because you never know whenever there is going to be some tiny ass little detail where you're like, I think I remember this. Let me go look in the book. And because Dr. Google isn't always the most reliable for getting your information. And then Tiffany asked, what advice would you have for graduating soon, finding jobs? Networking, still networking, doing all of you can there. You know, my last company, I helped weed out applications, and we had 160 applications. I was throwing away PhD applications because they dealt with a tiny little microbe in a stream for their PhD candidacy. And I'm like, that has nothing to do with geology or hydro work. That's for our eco group. So even checking on internships, the internships are all paid for. So there's no reason why you still can't apply for an internship when you're graduating, because if they like you and if you show your worth and they can keep you billable, they'll hire you. So, check with the internships and job boards, and get on to things like Indeed, where they're going to be just sending you positions that are open. I know Williams, Dr. Shiop asked if we are hiring interns. Yeah, there's a woman from Pitt is currently, I don't know, she works in Tulsa, so I don't really see her. My group, I actually work out of Tulsa, but I sit in West Virginia and work with the Northeast. But yeah, so we do interns. Williams is a little harder, especially for like the environmental, because a lot of times you have to hit the ground running. So you need to be that consultant and getting your good base built. So whenever you have that position, they're always looking for 5 to 10 years experience, a lot of times with the people I'm working with. So you need a good base there. Get a job, any job. Experience is good. Whenever you have 1 year experience, whenever they're looking for 0 to 2, guess what? You look a hell of a lot better than somebody with 0 years experience. So anything you can take, you got to take.
All right, we have one more question and then I'm gonna let you go. Thanks for sitting with us. The last question is, can you talk about your experience with the professional geologist process and study tips for the test?
Yes. So I finished my master's and then I went straight into studying for the PG. So I took all of that time, all of those extra hours, and poured over review material and study guides, and reading my books. I spent about 3 months, 3.5 months. It was 2 to 3 hours a night. It was 4 to 6 hours Saturday, 4 to 6 hours on Sunday. It was my second job. It pissed my wife off to no end. I remember that, whenever the results came out, I sat in front of my computer. I poured myself a bourbon first because I either wanted to celebrate or drown my sorrows. And I check the scores, and my wife hears me pound on the table and she's like, shit, we're going to go through this for another 3.5 months. I was so happy because I passed on the first time. But I know people that took it 4 and 5 times they also might have been a bit more distracted. You know, not everybody is willing to put 3 hours in a night from, you know, you finish dinner, clean your dishes, and then you're studying until you go to sleep. I didn't do that in college. Why would I want to do that while I'm working full time? But that's what it took. It's not easy. And I felt the practical was easier than the fundamentals because the fundamental was a lot of book stuff, where the practical, I'd already been working for 8 years. So it made sense to me because I was seeing that type of stuff. So the fundamental might be a lot easier for somebody coming right out of school, where you have been looking at the textbooks a lot more.
Awesome, thank you. I can't thank you enough for joining us. It's been really interesting, at least for me, to sort of hear the story of one of our graduates and your progression through the job market. So really appreciate you taking the hour to sit with us and share your story with us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris.
If anybody
Thank
has
you.
questions, you can always email me.
Thank you.
Okay,
Chris.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just a reminder to everyone, the next seminar is 2 weeks from now. It's Jeff Henderson, and he's going to be talking about how they're using tree debris to create fish habitat and restore sections of the Mississippi River. So that's 2 Wednesdays from 2 weeks from now, and same time, noon. We'll see you guys then.
Thank you. See you.
Bye.